Why Sauron feared Tom Bombadil more than anyone else. LOTR lore. Here is something the films never told you, and something most readers glide past without stopping. At the most important strategic council in the history of the Third Age, surrounded by elves and wizards and kings, the assembled minds of Middle-earth considered giving the One Ring to Tom Bombadil. Not as a joke, not as a throwaway suggestion quickly dismissed, as a genuine option debated by Gandalf himself. And the reason they rejected it was not that Bombadil lacked the power to protect it. It was something stranger and more unsettling than that. Tom Bombadil is immune to the ring. Completely, absolutely, inexplicably immune. He puts it on, and nothing happens. He is not tempted by it. He is not changed by it. He seems, if anything, mildly bored by it. And Sauron knew. This is not speculation pulled from nowhere. This is what the text actually says when you follow it all the way down through the Council of Elrond, through Tolkien's letters, through the Silmarillion's cosmology, through unfinished tales, through the small, devastating detail hiding in plain sight in a single chapter called In the House of Tom Bombadil. The answer to what Bombadil actually is, and what his existence meant to Sauron, is buried in those texts, and once you see it, the whimsical old singing hermit of the old forest becomes something that should make you deeply uneasy. So here is the question this video is going to orbit. Did Sauron avoid Tom Bombadil because he knew Bombadil couldn't stop him, or because Sauron understood that Bombadil's existence proved that everything Sauron believed about the nature of power was wrong? Hold that question. We are going to earn the answer. Let's start at the Council. The Council of Elrond is one of the most carefully constructed chapters Tolkien ever wrote. It is not a meeting. It is a war room. Every sentence Tolkien gives to Gandalf, to Elrond, to Boromir in that space, is weighed against the total available intelligence of Middle-earth's remaining free powers. These are not people making guesses. Gandalf has spent decades tracking the ring's movements. Elrond carries the memories of the Second Age, of standing at the slopes of Mount Doom, of watching Isildur refuse to cast the ring into the fire when casting it was the only rational option. Everyone at that table knows what is at stake, and everyone at that table knows that getting this wrong means the end. And in the middle of that council, Gandalf raises Tom Bombadil. The exact passage in Fellowship reads like this. Gandalf says that they considered sending the ring to Tom, and he acknowledges that Tom has power even over the ring. Tom could make the ring invisible, could see it for what it is, could handle it without being corrupted. But then Gandalf says something that the reader can miss, if they are moving fast. He says Tom is his own master. He says Tom cannot alter the ring itself or break its power over others. And then he says this. In the end, if all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first. Pay attention to that last line. Last as he was first. Tolkien wrote that. Tolkien, who was a professional philologist, who chose words the way a surgeon chooses an instrument, who revised and reconsidered and second-guessed his own prose across decades of letters and drafts and notes. He chose to describe Tom Bombadil in the voice of Gandalf as first and last. That is not color. That is cosmology. That is Tolkien telling you exactly what category of being Bombadil occupies, and the category he is putting him in is the category of primordial existence. First means before everything else. Before Sauron, before the Valar, possibly before the music itself. Now think about what that actually means for the ring. The One Ring was forged in the Second Age. Sauron poured his own will, his own power, his own desire for dominion into it, concentrating everything that made him dangerous into a single object, designed to extend his control over anyone who had ever wanted anything. The ring's mechanism, as Tolkien establishes across multiple letters and across the Silmarillion, is essentially a predator of desire. It finds what you want. It amplifies it. It bends your wanting towards Sauron's wanting, until your will and his will become indistinguishable. The ring does not overpower you. It seduces you. It offers you exactly what you already want, but more, but guaranteed, but permanent. This is why it works differently on different bearers. It shows Boromir a military victory for Gondor. It shows Galadriel a world under her beautiful, just, terrible rule. It shows Sam his garden, but larger, impossibly lush, impossibly perfect. The ring is not a generic corruptor. It is a precision instrument for finding the desire that already lives in you and making that desire monstrous. But here is what nobody asks about that mechanism. What happens when the instrument encounters a being who has no desire for dominion? Not suppressed desire, not resisted desire, not desire that has been overcome through great moral effort and sacrifice. Genuinely absent desire. A being for whom the very category of wanting to control, wanting to possess, wanting to extend power over the world and its inhabitants simply does not exist. The ring reaches in and finds nothing. Picture this, the One Ring, the instrument of Sauron's entire philosophy of power, the object that could corrupt a Maya, that could begin unraveling a being as great as Galadriel the moment she touched it, sitting in Tom Bombadil's hand. And Tom holding it up and looking through it like it is an interesting pebble, and then tossing it into the air and catching it and handing it back. The ring does not make him invisible. It does not whisper to him. It does not call to him. It does not know what to do with him. Because it was built, at its most fundamental level, as a machine for amplifying the desire for power. And Tom Bombadil does not have that desire. He is not resisting it. He simply does not have it to resist. That is not just immunity. That is a logical falsification. Sauron built the ring on an assumption that every being capable of thought is capable of wanting dominion, and therefore every being capable of thought is, eventually, corruptible. It was not a paranoid assumption. It was, by the evidence of Middle-earth's entire history, a reasonable one. The Noldor fell to it. Morgoth's Maiar fell to it. Kings fell to it. The rings of power worked on the elven ring-bearers, who were the wisest of their age, even if Celebrimbor's rings were free of Sauron's direct corruption. The pattern held across thousands of years of Arda's history. Desire for power is universal among thinking beings, and therefore the ring's mechanism would always find purchase. Except in the Old Forest. Now here is where we need to go deeper, because the immunity is only the beginning of the question. The interesting question is not just that Bombadil is immune, it is what that immunity tells us about what Bombadil actually is. Because Tolkien was not in the habit of creating arbitrary exceptions to his world's metaphysical rules. If something exists outside the rules, it is because it predates the rules. And that is exactly what Tolkien tells us. In letters, in drafts, in the very words Goldberry speaks. In letter 144, Tolkien describes Tom Bombadil as the spirit of the vanishing Oxford and Berkshire countryside. People often quote that description to dismiss Bombadil as a nostalgic authorial insertion, a bit of pastoral fancy that Tolkien was too fond of to cut. But that is only half the letter. In the same correspondence, Tolkien goes further. He says that Bombadil represents a mode of existence that is entirely outside the framework of power and domination, a being who had withdrawn from the contest of the world, not from weakness, but from a deliberate philosophical choice that predates the contest itself. Withdrawn from the contest, not defeated in it, not sitting out because he lacked the power to participate. Withdrawn. The word implies a prior decision, made before the contest began, that the contest itself was not worth entering. Now hold that alongside what the Silmarillion establishes about how Arda works. The Ainulindal, the opening of the Silmarillion, is Tolkien's creation myth, and it is one of the most beautiful and philosophically loaded pieces of mythology in all of English literature. It establishes that Ilúvatar created the Ainur and taught them music, and that the music is the template of the world. Everything in Arda that follows, every history, every war, every ring of power, is an elaboration of themes first sung before the world was made. Every being in Middle-earth who participates in history is, in a deep metaphysical sense, participating in the music, carrying their theme into the world, and contending with other themes. Sauron's theme, established in the Silmarillions of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, is domination. His desire is to order everything, to bring all things into his pattern, to make all will conform to his will. It is the logical extreme of Morgoth's theme, which was to unmake the music entirely. Sauron is more patient, more subtle, more architectural than Morgoth. He does not want to destroy the world. He wants to own it. And every other being in Middle-earth is comprehensible to Sauron through this framework. He understands elves because they desire things, even beautiful things, even just things. He understands men because they fear death and desire power over it. He understands dwarves because they desire gold and the deep places of the earth. He understands everything that operates within the framework of desire and dominion. Which brings us to the question Tolkien never answers directly, but answers anyway, through the things he chose not to say. What is Bombadil's theme in the music? Tolkien never tells us. What Tolkien tells us instead is that Goldberry, when Frodo asks who Tom Bombadil is, answers with two words: he is. Not, he is ancient. Not, he is powerful. Not, he is a guardian, or a spirit, or a servant of Ilúvatar. She says, he is. Tolkien was a Catholic philologist who knew Exodus. He knew exactly what those words echo. I am that I am, the divine name from Exodus 3:14, the statement of pure, unconditional, self-contained being. Existence that requires no external justification, no relationship to power or dominion, no theme to fulfill, no desire to achieve. Just being. That is not whimsy. That is theology embedded in a children's book character. And once you hear it that way, everything about Bombadil becomes more alarming. Because if Bombadil exists outside the music, if his existence predates the framework that makes every other being in Arda legible, then he is not just immune to the ring. He is immune to the entire metaphysical order that the ring was built to exploit. The ring reaches into Bombadil and finds not a being with suppressed desires, but a being constituted by something that desire simply cannot touch, a mode of existence for which Sauron has no map. And now we arrive at the question of Sauron's awareness. Let's be precise about what Tolkien establishes about Sauron's intelligence. In Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, Tolkien writes that Sauron's cunning and his knowledge of Middle-earth's peoples and histories made him the most dangerous power in the world after Morgoth's defeat. Sauron spent the Second Age learning, watching, manipulating, building. He seduced Celebrimbor, the greatest elven craftsman of his age, through precisely calibrated flattery and the appearance of shared artistic ambition. He knew what the elves wanted. He knew how to give it to them in a form that served his own ends. He was, in the language of the Silmarillion, Morgoth's most capable student in the arts of corrupting other minds. A being of that intelligence, operating for thousands of years in a world that contains the old forest, does not simply fail to notice Tom Bombadil. Sauron noticed. The question is what noticing meant. Picture this: Sauron, in whatever form he chose after Morgoth's defeat, casting his awareness across Middle-earth the way a general surveys a map. Every living intelligence, every elf lord, every great man, every dwarf king, a potential piece on his board, a potential will to bend. He reads them all. He knows their weaknesses. He knows their desires. He knows, with the cold precision of a mind devoted entirely to understanding how to own other minds, exactly where to apply pressure. And then his awareness reaches the old forest, and it finds something it cannot read. Not something hostile, not something threatening in the way a great army is threatening. Something simply, profoundly, categorically outside his framework of understanding. A being who does not want anything he can offer. A being whose nature does not participate in the contest of the world. A being whose existence, just by existing, suggests that Sauron's entire philosophy of power, his certainty that all minds eventually bend to desire, and therefore to him, is not a universal law, but a local one, valid in the world of the music. not valid everywhere. That is the fear. Not that Bombadil might raise an army. Not that Bombadil might forge a counter-ring. Not that Bombadil might challenge him in any of the ways that the legends of Middle-earth record as worthy of fear. The fear is philosophical. The fear is what Bombadil represents. Here is what the appendices and Tolkien's drafts confirm about the Old Forest itself. In The Return of the Shadow, the 6th volume of the history of Middle-earth, Christopher Tolkien collects his father's early drafts of the Fellowship, and in those drafts, the Old Forest is described not as a simple enchanted wood, but as a remnant of something vastly older. The trees of the Old Forest remember a time before the dominion of men, before the dominion of elves, before Sauron's long shadow fell across the world. The hostility of Old Man Willow and the other ancient trees toward travelers is not malice in the ordinary sense. It is something closer to grief, grief for a world that existed before the world of power and domination and contest, a world where trees were not threatened by axes and fires and the passage of armies. Tom Bombadil rules that remnant, not by force. He rules it because he belongs to it in a way that no other living being belongs to anything. He does not own the Old Forest. He is continuous with it. He is its oldest memory. And this is the detail that should stop you cold if you think about what it means for Sauron's strategy. Sauron's strategy, from the moment of his first serious bid for power in the Second Age, has been to bring everything into his pattern, to leave nothing outside, not because he is greedy in the small, petty sense, but because his philosophy requires it. His philosophy is that order is good, and his order is the only true order, and any part of the world that exists outside his order is a challenge to it, a disorder he has not yet corrected. He cannot tolerate the existence of the uncontrollable, not because it threatens him militarily, but because it refutes him philosophically. And Tom Bombadil, just by existing, just by singing his songs in his little house while the world burns around him, refutes Sauron philosophically every single day. Pay attention to this next part. The reason Sauron never marched on the Old Forest is not strategic calculation. Sauron marched on things that were more powerful than the Old Forest. He brought down Númenor with a word in the ear of a king, a feat that required no army at all. He could have burned the Old Forest. He could have sent the Nazgul through it. He did not. The reason he did not is the same reason the ring had no effect on Tom Bombadil. Because fire cannot burn what is not within the logic of fire. Because the Nazgul cannot terrify what is not within the logic of fear. Because the ring cannot corrupt what is not within the logic of desire. Bombadil does not participate in any of these logics. He is not brave in opposition to fear. He is simply not afraid. He is not temperate in opposition to greed. He simply does not want. These are not virtues he has cultivated. They are not achievements he has earned through great struggle. They are what he is. And you cannot threaten, corrupt, or destroy something by applying tools that only work within a framework that thing does not inhabit. Sauron understood this. With his vast intelligence and his deep knowledge of Middle-earth's metaphysics, Sauron would have understood, perhaps very early in the history of his ambitions, that Tom Bombadil was a problem of a categorically different kind from every other problem he faced. Every other opponent you could plan for. The Noldor, seduce them with craft and knowledge. The Dunedain, outlast them because they die. The Valar, avoid direct confrontation, work through proxies, wait for them to withdraw from direct intervention, which they always do. These are all solvable problems for a sufficiently patient, sufficiently intelligent evil. Tom Bombadil is not a solvable problem. He is an insoluble one. And here is where the Council of Elrond becomes, in retrospect, one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the entire book. Because the question Gandalf raises at the Council, the question of whether the ring could be given to Bombadil for safekeeping, is not just a strategic question. It is, in disguise, a cosmological question. It is asking, can the solution to Sauron's power be found in the mode of existence that Sauron cannot touch? And the answer Gandalf gives is no. But the reason is not the reason you think. Gandalf does not say Bombadil lacks power. He does not say Bombadil would be defeated. He says Bombadil would not be interested. He says that Bombadil would not keep the ring safe, not because he couldn't, but because he might lose it, might forget about it, might set it down somewhere and wander off singing because there was something more immediately interesting to attend to. And if Sauron came for it in force, Bombadil would not resist the destruction of the world on behalf of a ring he never cared about. That is the catch. The same quality that makes Bombadil immune to the ring, his total absence of desire for power, makes him useless as a guardian of it. You cannot ask the being who does not care about the contest of the world to fight for the outcome of the contest of the world. He will not fight for it. He will not fight against it. He will watch it happen, if it happens, from somewhere outside it, and he will still be there after, singing, because he was first and because he will be last, and the contest was never really about him. Picture this. The Shire has fallen. Mirkwood has burned. Minas Tirith has crumbled. The ring has returned to Sauron, and the shadow has spread across every corner of Middle-earth, and somewhere in the remnant of what was the old forest, in a small house near the banks of a river, Tom Bombadil is still singing, still wandering his land, still knowing the names of every bird and tree and stone. Sauron's darkness covers the world, and it covers the old forest too, but it does not touch what is inside. Not because Tom is fighting it, because Tom is simply, structurally, constitutionally, elsewhere, outside the logic, outside the darkness, and outside the light, just being. Tolkien says exactly this, in Gandalf's own words. In the end, if all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first. It sounds like a prediction of eventual defeat, but read it again more carefully. Last as he was first does not mean Bombadil will be destroyed after everyone else. It means he will be the last thing left. The way he was the first thing there. If Sauron wins and the world ends in his shadow, Bombadil will still exist at the edge of it, in whatever diminished and darkened form the world takes on. Last as first, the beginning and the end, but not the middle, not the contest. The contest is not his. It was never his. This is, if you allow it to be, one of the most melancholy things Tolkien ever wrote. Not in the way that the death of heroes is melancholy, or the passing of the elves, or the forgetting of Númenor. Those are tragedies of loss, of things that were great and are gone. Bombadil's melancholy is of a different kind. It is the melancholy of the thing that cannot be lost because it never fully entered. The being that exists in parallel to history, without ever being of history. The consciousness that watches the world struggle from a position so far outside it that the outcome of the struggle, in the deepest sense, does not reach him. Is that freedom, or is it a kind of exile? Tolkien doesn't answer. But the question lives in every scene Bombadil appears in, and it changes the texture of those scenes if you bring it with you. Now let's go to the oldest question, the one the casual reader almost never asks. What is Tom Bombadil? Not who, what. Tolkien himself acknowledged, in multiple letters, that he did not give Bombadil a definitive origin or nature, and that this was deliberate. In letter 144 he calls him a mystery. In letter 153 he says that he represents a natural pacifist view, someone who loves things for themselves and not for use. In his private notes he floated the possibility that Bombadil might be one of the Ainur, a Maya who had come to Arda and then become so absorbed in the physical world that he had essentially merged with it. But he rejected that explanation as insufficient, because it does not explain the immunity to the ring, since Maya can be corrupted, since Sauron himself is a Maya, since the ring had power over Gandalf, and would have had power over Saruman if they had taken it. There is one explanation that has been proposed by scholars of the Legendarium that fits every piece of canonical evidence, and it is as unsettling as anything in the Silmarillion. What if Bombadil is not a being within Arda, but a being older than Arda? Not an Ainu, not a Maya, not a Vala, but something that existed before the Ainulindal, before the music, before Ilúvatar conceived the Ainur at all? The music, remember, is the blueprint of the world. The music is everything that happens in Arda, including Sauron's long campaign of corruption, including the forging of the rings, including the War of the Ring and its outcome. Everything in the world of the music is comprehensible within the music's framework. Power, desire, corruption, sacrifice, victory, defeat, all of it is already, in some sense, in the music. But the Ainu Lindale tells us that when Ilúvatar sang the world into being, there were things in it that the Ainur had not put there. Tolkien describes Ilúvatar pointing out to the Ainur themes in the music that none of them had conceived, things that came into the world not from any Ainu's imagination, but from Ilúvatar's own creation. And the Ainur do not understand these things. They look at them and wonder, what if Bombadil is one of those things? What if he is not a being who came into Arda from outside, but a being who arose from Arda itself, from the earth and water and green things, independent of the music, independent of the framework of desire and power, a consciousness that Arda generated from its own primordial substance before the Ainur had finished shaping it. An entity that belongs to Arda not as the elves and men belong to it, as participants in its history, but the way the bedrock belongs to it, as substance, as ground. And here is where it gets strange. Because if that is what Bombadil is, if he is Arda's own self-awareness, the world knowing itself from the inside, then the ring's failure to affect him is not just immunity, it is something closer to the ring being unable to affect the ground it is sitting on. You cannot corrupt the earth beneath the earth. You cannot seduce the bedrock. You cannot make stone want something. Sauron, the great architect of corruption, the being who could find the desire in any mind and bend it to his will, would have encountered this truth early in his work. He would have turned his awareness toward the old forest and found something so fundamentally unlike everything else in Middle-earth that his entire toolkit was useless. His seductions assume desire, his threats assume fear, his domination assumes a will that can be broken or bent. None of these assumptions apply, and a strategist of Sauron's caliber does not waste energy on the unconquerable. He looks away. This is the move every great power makes when it encounters a problem it cannot solve. It redefines the problem as irrelevant. Sauron's silence about Bombadil in the text of the Legendarium is not an absence of awareness. It is a strategy. If you cannot control it, you ignore it. You build your empire around it. You make sure your servants do not look too closely at it. You hope that the world will forget it is there. And the world nearly did. Think about how close Middle-earth came to forgetting Bombadil entirely. By the time of the War of the Ring, Bombadil is so removed from the world's affairs that even Gandalf, who knows more about Middle-earth than almost anyone alive, seems uncertain about the full extent of Bombadil's nature. He knows Bombadil is ancient. He knows Bombadil is immune to the ring. He knows Bombadil is, in some sense, first and last. But even Gandalf does not know what Bombadil is. Not fully. Not in the way you know a thing when you can place it within a framework. Bombadil resists framework. That is his nature. And now, having built all of this up, let's return to the Council of Elrond with fresh eyes. Because there is a dimension of that scene that almost no one talks about. When Gandalf raises the possibility of giving the ring to Tom Bombadil, the room's reaction is interesting. Glorfindel agrees with Gandalf that it will not work. The others do not leap to contradict. There is no impassioned speech about Bombadil's power. Nobody says, but surely Bombadil could protect it better than anyone. Nobody makes the case that Bombadil's immunity to the ring makes him the ideal guardian. Why not? Because everyone in that room understands, at some level, the same thing Gandalf understands. Bombadil's immunity is not a weapon. It is a nature. And you cannot weaponize a nature. You cannot recruit a being to your cause whose entire existence consists of having no cause but being. Bombadil would not guard the ring actively, would not carry it into Mordor, would not throw it into the fire. He would not, because these are all acts of participation in the contest, and Bombadil does not participate. The genius of Tolkien's construction here is that he has created a being who is, Simultaneously, the most powerful individual in Middle-earth in one specific sense, and entirely useless in every practical sense. Bombadil is the only being alive who could handle the ring without corruption. He is also the only being alive who would not handle it purposefully. The immunity and the uselessness are the same thing seen from different angles. And Sauron, across the long years of the Third Age, would have known this too. Picture this. Sauron in his tower at Dol Guldur, or later at Barad-dûr, turning his great eye across Middle-earth with the slow, comprehensive sweep of a mind that has spent millennia cataloguing threats. He sees the elves who remain. He sees the line of the Dunedain, diminished, wandering, keeping the north safe without recognition or reward. He sees the dwarves under their mountains, stubborn and contained. He sees the men of Gondor, proud and weakening, stretched thin across a frontier against which he has been pressing for centuries. He sees the Shire and sees it as nothing, a rural backwater of small people with small lives, not a threat. He sees the old forest and sees it as a reminder that some things in the world simply cannot be accounted for in the ledger of power, an anomaly, an edge case, a thing that does not participate in the war he is prosecuting, and which he has long ago decided not to pursue, because pursuing it would mean engaging with a being whose existence implicitly challenges his entire worldview. And here is the quiet horror of that image. Sauron, the most powerful evil mind in the history of Arda since Morgoth's defeat, choosing not to look at the one being in Middle-earth who could not be corrupted, not because engaging that being would destroy him, but because engaging that being would force him to confront something he has spent his entire existence refusing to confront. The possibility that his theology of power is wrong. Sauron believes, with the conviction of a great intellect that has spent ages testing and refining its beliefs, that power is the organizing principle of existence, that all things desire to dominate or to be dominated, that the ring is not just a weapon but a philosophical proof. Given the ring, any mind in Middle-earth will eventually reach for it. Given long enough, any being who has ever wanted anything will be owned. This is not cruelty for its own sake. This is Sauron's cosmology, his vision of the order of things. Tom Bombadil is a counterexample that has been sitting in the old forest since before Sauron existed. A counterexample that Sauron cannot refute, because you cannot argue with a counterexample that is willing to engage. And Bombadil is not willing to argue. He is not making a philosophical claim. He is just being. In the space between Sauron's reach and Bombadil's nature, there is no argument to be had. There is only the silence of the unconquerable, humming to itself by the river. Now consider the central question again, but from deeper down. Did Sauron fear Tom Bombadil? The word fear might not be quite right. Fear implies a recognition of threat, and Bombadil is not, in the military sense, a threat. He will not march on Mordor. He will not forge counter-rings. He will not send armies or raise allies, or do any of the things that constitute a threat in the framework of Middle-earth's wars. But there is a kind of fear that is not about military threat. It is the fear of the thing that disproves you, the fear of the existence that your entire architecture of thought cannot accommodate. Philosophers experience this when an empirical result breaks a theory they have spent decades building. Scientists experience it when a single observation falsifies a model they have staked their reputation on. Dictators experience it when someone chooses dignity over survival in a way the dictator cannot understand, because the dictator's entire system of control depends on the assumption that everyone, eventually, chooses survival. Sauron experienced something like this in the direction of the old forest. Not panic, not the cold sweat of a being who knows it is about to be destroyed. Something quieter and more corrosive. The discomfort of a worldview that cannot quite close around an anomaly. The faint, persistent, unacknowledged wrongness of a door in the corner of the room that you have learned not to look at, because every time you look at it, you remember that you do not know what is behind it, and that not knowing is the one thing your certainty cannot survive. Sauron was enormously powerful. Sauron was enormously intelligent. Sauron was also, in the deepest sense, enormously insecure, in the way that all beings who build their identity on the assertion of total control are insecure. Because total control that is not actually total is not control at all. It is a performance, and the old forest was the standing refutation of the performance. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. Tolkien's letters tell us that Bombadil's relationship to things is to love them for themselves, not for their use. Letter 153 says this explicitly, and Tolkien frames it as both Bombadil's virtue and his limitation. He cannot use the ring because using implies imposing your will on the thing being used, and Bombadil does not impose. He cannot guard the ring because guarding implies caring what happens to it, and Bombadil does not care. He loves the things of the world without wanting to do anything with them. He loves the water and the trees and the birds and the ancient days without wanting to possess them, extend them, increase them, shape them to his purposes. This is the exact opposite of Sauron. Sauron, in the Silmarillion and in Tolkien's letters, is described as someone who began with a genuine love of order and craft. His original desire was not evil in the way Morgoth's was. Morgoth desired destruction. Sauron desired to organize, to make things work, to bring the world under a rational order. His fall was the fall of the administrator who becomes the tyrant, the craftsman who becomes the controller, the being who loved order so much that he could not accept that anything should be free from his ordering. Love of things for use. That is Sauron's mode. He loves the world in the sense that he wants to perfect it, which means he wants to own it, which means he wants to change everything in it into an expression of his will. And Bombadil loves things for themselves, not for their use, not for their perfectibility, not for what they could become if properly ordered, just for what they are. These are not 2 points on a spectrum. These are 2 categorically different orientations toward existence. And between them, they illuminate everything about why the ring could not touch Bombadil. The ring is a tool for amplifying the love of things for use, for domination, for control. It has nothing to say to the love of things for themselves. It speaks one language, and Bombadil speaks another, and they are not mutually intelligible. Now let's go somewhere the casual Tolkien discussion very rarely goes, because it requires holding 2 ideas simultaneously, and they are uncomfortable together. Bombadil's indifference is both his greatest gift and his deepest wound. We have spent this entire video talking about what Bombadil's nature means for Sauron, for the ring, for the war. But what does it mean for Bombadil? He exists outside the contest. He is immune to the ring. He cannot be corrupted or threatened or seduced. He will still be there after everyone else is gone. That sounds, from the outside, like an enviable position. But Tolkien is not sentimental about this. Tolkien is almost brutal about it. Because Bombadil's immunity is inseparable from his irrelevance. He cannot be corrupted because he cannot care. He cannot guard the ring because he cannot sustain the interest. He cannot save the world because the world's contest is not, in any deep sense, his. He watches the hobbits arrive in his house with the ring, and he is genuinely glad to see them, genuinely warm and kind and joyful in the way that only he can be. And then they leave, carrying the ring toward its destruction, and Bombadil goes back to his songs. He does not send them with counsel they can use in the dark days ahead. Not really. He does not promise them aid. He gives them his knowledge of the Barrow Wights and his blessing, and then he releases them into a world that will nearly kill all of them. He does not go with them. He cannot. Not because the road is too dangerous for him, because he fears nothing. Not because he is too old or too slow or too weak, but because following them into the war would mean caring about the war's outcome, and caring about outcomes is the first step toward wanting to control them, and wanting to control them is the first step toward the ring. The immunity and the exile are the same thing. Picture this. Frodo, in the last years of his life in the Shire, before departing for the Grey Havens, carrying the wound of the ring-bearer and the memory of everything he survived, and somewhere far to the east, in a house by a river, in an old forest that remembers a world before grief. Tom Bombadil, still singing, not grieving, not remembering the War of the Ring with any particular weight. Alive in the way that the bedrock is alive, continuous, unchanged, outside the passage of time that carves grief into everything else. Is that peace, or is it the deepest loneliness there is? Tolkien leaves that unanswered too. But I think he knew what he was doing when he put that question into the architecture of the character. Bombadil's contentment is genuine. His joy is genuine. But his joy is the joy of a being who cannot lose anything because he never fully holds anything. He loves the moment. He is the moment. But the moment passes, and Bombadil is still there, and the things he loved are gone, and he sings about them, and the grief does not reach him the way it reaches men and elves. Is that freedom from suffering? Or is it a kind of barrier between Bombadil and the full weight of existence? I am not sure Tolkien knew, finally, or I am not sure he was willing to say. What he was willing to say, through the structure of the story, is this: the world was saved not by the being who was immune to everything, but by the hobbits who were not immune to anything. Frodo could be corrupted by the ring. He was corrupted by it, in the end, on the edge of the crack of doom, and if not for Gollum's intervention, the story would have ended in catastrophe. The salvation of Middle-earth came through vulnerability, through the capacity for suffering, through beings who were fully inside the contest of the world, and therefore fully inside the range of its costs. Bombadil, who could not be corrupted, also could not carry the ring to Mordor. Not because it was too hard, because the carrying required caring, and the caring required the kind of desire that the ring could exploit. The ring corrupted the very thing that made the quest possible, the desire to save the world. And that desire, which was Frodo's and Sam's and Gandalf's and Aragorn's, is the same category of desire that the ring could theoretically turn, but turned slowly enough, and resisted hard enough, and accompanied by grace, it became the mechanism of Sauron's defeat. Bombadil could not do what Frodo did. Frodo could not be what Bombadil is, and the salvation of the world depended on someone being willing to be Frodo. This is the part that changes everything. The reason Bombadil was not the answer to the ring crisis is not a limitation of Tolkien's plotting. It is the spine of Tolkien's entire theology of redemption. Bombadil represents the contemplative mode, the pure mode, the mode of existence that stands outside of history and loves the world from a position of total safety. But redemption, in Tolkien's world as in his Catholic faith, does not come from the safe place. It comes from the wounded place, from the place that entered fully into the danger and paid the price. The eucatastrophe, Tolkien's word for the sudden, unexpected turn toward grace that defines the climax of every great story, requires someone who was in enough danger to be saved. Bombadil is never in enough danger. He is never in any danger at all. He cannot be part of the eucatastrophe because he cannot be part of the catastrophe. And there is something genuinely moving about that, if you let it be. The being who was first and will be last, who was there before the music and will remain after the last note fades, who loves the world so thoroughly and so unconditionally that he has never once needed to want to control it, who sits at the edge of history's greatest contest and does not enter, not out of cowardice or indifference in the cruel sense, but out of a fidelity to his own nature so complete that even Sauron's genius could not find a purchase in it. And the world was saved without him. Had to be saved without him, because salvation required someone who could fall. Let me ask the question one more time, now, after everything we have built. Did Sauron fear Tom Bombadil? Here is what I think. Here is the answer the text earns if you follow it all the way down. Sauron did not fear Bombadil the way he feared Gandalf or Galadriel, who were direct threats, whose power could contest his own. He feared Bombadil the way a tyrant fears a monk. The tyrant has built his entire identity on the premise that power is the only real thing, that the desire for dominion is universal, that everyone, deep down, wants what he has. And the monk, in a bare cell, having renounced every form of power and desire, refusing to be afraid and refusing to want, is a living argument that the tyrant is wrong. Not about tactics, about reality itself, about what the world is and what makes a life worth living. The tyrant cannot destroy the argument by destroying the monk. The destruction only makes the argument louder. So the tyrant does what Sauron did with Bombadil. He ignores him. He builds his empire around the monk's cell and tries not to look at it. He tells himself the monk is irrelevant, marginal, a curiosity, a harmless eccentric who does not matter to the real work of the world. And the monk keeps sitting in his cell, unconquered, and the tyrant keeps building, and somewhere in the tyrant's architecture of certainty, a crack opens that he spends the rest of his existence papering over. Sauron's crack was in the old forest. It had been there since before he was, and he never closed it. That is why the ring had no power over Tom Bombadil, not because Bombadil was stronger, but because the ring was built on a lie, and Bombadil, just by existing, was the truth the lie could not touch. The War of the Ring ended with the ring destroyed and Sauron unmade, scattered across the winds of Arda, too dispersed ever to take form again. And when the last echo of his presence faded, when the eye went dark, and the tower fell, and the servants fled, Bombadil was still there, in his house, by the river, singing, last as he was first. Tolkien gives us, in those 4 words, the shape of a consciousness that outlasts everything, not through victory, but through being, not through power, but through the irreducible fact of existing in a mode that power cannot reach. There is something in that image, when you hold it long enough, that goes beyond the story of the War of the Ring and speaks to something true about the relationship between force and being, between domination and presence, between the world of contest and the world that exists before and after the contest ends. What does it mean that the being who could not be destroyed by Sauron was also the being who could not save us from him? What does it mean that immunity and uselessness are the same property viewed from different sides? What does it mean that the salvation of the world had to come from someone who could have been lost, rather than from someone who was incapable of it? I think it means that Tolkien believed something very specific about the relationship between vulnerability and love, that you cannot truly care about something you cannot lose, that the capacity for loss and the capacity for love are the same capacity. That Bombadil's immunity to the ring and his inability to carry it into the fire are not 2 separate facts, but one single fact. He is outside the logic of caring, which means he is outside the logic of grief, which means he is also outside the logic of sacrifice. And sacrifice, in Tolkien's world, is the mechanism of every good that has ever been achieved. Frodo sacrificed his peace. Gandalf sacrificed his life in Moria and came back changed. Aragorn sacrificed anonymity. Sam sacrificed safety. The entire structure of Middle-earth's redemption is built from acts of giving up something real, something that hurt to lose. Bombadil has nothing to give up. He cannot sacrifice, because sacrifice requires attachment, and attachment requires desire, and desire is what the ring needs, and the ring cannot find it in him. This is Tolkien's deepest joke, if it is a joke. The safest being in Middle-earth was the most useless being in Middle-earth, not in spite of his safety but because of it. The world was saved by the unsafe ones, the ones who could fall, and very nearly did, and held on anyway. And Tom Bombadil sang by the river, and did not know what he had witnessed. Or perhaps he did know, in the way that ancient things know the passing of seasons, with the calm certainty of a consciousness that has seen the beginning and expects to see the end, and finds the middle interesting, in its way, but never quite urgent enough to change his plans. If you have been sitting with this question since the beginning of this video, if you have been asking it along with me, here is where I want to leave you. The question was never really about what Sauron feared. It was about what it means to exist outside the logic of power in a world organized entirely around power. It was about the one being who proved that Sauron's vision of the world was not a universal law but a local ordinance. And it was about the strange, melancholy, genuinely moving truth that the being who was most free from evil was also the least able to fight it. Tom Bombadil is not a plot hole. He is not a charming irrelevance. He is the negative space in Tolkien's argument about power, the shape of the thing that power cannot fill. He is the question Sauron could never answer. He is the door Gandalf opened at the Council, and then gently, wisely, closed again, because the answer behind it was not the answer Middle-earth needed. Middle-earth needed Frodo. But I am glad Tom Bombadil is there. I think Tolkien was too. Not because he saves anything, because he is the proof, sitting quietly in its old house by the river, that there exists a mode of being that the darkness cannot reach, not because the darkness is not strong enough, but because that mode of being never gave the darkness anything to hold. That is not victory, but it might be something rarer than victory. It might be grace. I want to know what you think about this, because the question of what Bombadil actually is, underneath all the singing and the yellow boots and the river daughter, is one that Tolkien scholars have genuinely never settled. Whether he is an Ainu who merged with Arda, or a consciousness Arda generated from itself, or something outside even those categories entirely, the answer changes what his immunity means and what his indifference costs. There is a version of this question that ends with Bombadil as the luckiest being in Middle-earth, and there is a version that ends with him as the loneliest. I am not sure those are different versions. If you have thoughts about which reading the text actually supports, if there is a passage, or a letter, or a detail in the history of Middle-earth that you think clinches it one way or the other, bring it into the comments. This is the kind of question that only gets better with more eyes on it. And if you want to keep going deeper into the corners of this world that the films never showed you, the places where Tolkien buried the things that change everything else, stay close. There is more.